Hello and welcome to the review, the responses we got for the 10 questions for atheists.
What is going on with my camera?
They have properly been drinking and on drugs, so these answers are probably going to get better as they progress.
Get massacred?
Just want to make sure that I can be heard, essentially.
What are you guys talking about?
Well, a lot of people are going to hate this, but typically I just use the term atheist.
You know, I think there's only the natural world. Reality is exhausted by nature.
That's the best face. That's the best face ever.
Hello and welcome to the review of the responses we got to our 10 questions for atheists video. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And today we are going to be discussing question 2. So, question 2 was, have you ever believed in a god? Which religion did you ascribe to, if any? If not, when did you first get introduced to the concept of gods? Now, I do understand that this does exclude a certain type of non-theist, the kind that has never been introduced to the concept of gods or is too young to understand the proposition of God's existence. But realistically speaking, I felt that that was completely irrelevant, because if you're on an atheist's channel and you're interested in discussing atheism or non-theism or religion in general, then you'd have a pretty good idea of at least one God's concept, if not all of them.
I agree.
So we had a number of different videos that we felt that we would address. There was some uniformity in the stories. Most of the people who responded did have some form of Christian background. But there were a few answers in there that I didn't expect, and a couple of good stories as well. So, Dave, who was the first one that we were going to be reviewing tonight?
TMN.
Okie dokie.
I believed in a god as a child, but I was not in a religious environment at all, so God's existence was trivial to me. I don't remember when the idea of gods was first presented to me, but I remember that the moment the idea that they may not exist was presented to me, that immediately seemed to make more sense.
Okay, and that was our first response, and it was from TMN, who's quite an interesting fella. We saw him in the last question, and he's an agnostic. And here he's describing that he was a believer when he was a child, and he was raised in a religious environment. And it made more sense to him that God does not exist when he was introduced to that idea.
And that's fair enough. Actually, that reminds me of when I was about 6 or 7 years old at school. And this guy, Patrick Gillett, he told me that he didn't believe in God and his family didn't believe in God. And at that point in time, with how I was brought up in the school I was in, it seemed a bit odd, but it definitely made me go, why? And start thinking about things. And that may well have been the seed of doubt that was first placed in me. I wouldn't say that the second it was presented to me, that the idea that they may not exist or gods may not exist was presented to him, immediately seemed to make more sense. But I will say that it made me go, oh, there's actually a chance that this might not be the case. That might answer some of the questions that I have that haven't been answered.
Well, if you're raised in that kind of environment, it's normalized. It's shall we say, the ordinary claim. And the God does not exist becomes the extraordinary claim. To someone in that situation, I'm not talking about as a sort of overall concept. But to, you know, the kid in that position, yeah, it's going to be what kind of claim is that?
Yeah. Interesting that there's someone who found it immediately made more sense. I mean, maybe he's just that much brighter than me that it was suddenly like, oh yeah, clearly. Yeah. So who's our next video, Dave?
And that would be Emerson Green.
Oh, Emerson. Excellent.
Yeah.
I was a believer until my late teenage years. I was like a Protestant Christian. And yeah, in the Midwest, like I just started off believing in young earth creationism and went to a vaguely non-denominational church, and eventually became like more and more charismatic. But you know, I mean, I guess I'll talk more about this later for the next question. But yeah, I mean, like this was like an integral part of my life. You know, it was something I took deeply seriously. But yeah, I sort of went down the more like charismatic path because I was just attracted to like the like miraculous nature of their practice, and you know, their claims that the Holy Spirit was like directly active in their communities and that it was like tangible and maybe like verifiable in some sense. But yeah, then I started deconverting after like a couple years of being in that world.
So that was Emerson Green. Thank you, Emerson. Really appreciate the answer. You brought up a couple of things there that were not brought up by the rest of the people that responded. The first being you were once a YEC. So for anyone that isn't aware, a YEC is a young earth creationist. They tend to believe that the world is between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, and everything was created by God. The reason it looks old is because God created it to look that way, and basically throws out pretty much any science, especially stuff around dating methods and everything like that, because they don't work, because they only seem to show that the world is billions of years old because that's the way God wanted it to look. Young earth creationism is the reason I actually got into the online debating world. I met in England the only young earth creationist I have ever met outside of the internet, and the first time I ever met one. And it was... well, it was a mind-blowing experience, really, because I couldn't believe that anyone genuinely believed this. All the Christians I'd known up until that point fully accepted all the scientific discoveries. They just had certain gaps that they filled with God. And even my education growing up as a Christian, there was always a very strong scientific understanding. The young earth creationist perspective really sort of rejects a large body of science. And it got me really, really curious. And that's what inspired me to come online and start chatting with people. And the guy that also used to provide links to Answers in Genesis, and you might have realized that our name as Answers in Reason is a sort of a tongue-in-cheek to them. If you hadn't noticed that, man, where have you been? And it also allows us to play with certain puns like air. It's necessary for life. But yeah, so I can't imagine what it's actually like being a young earth creationist, especially one that is now an atheist and looking back on that sort of thing, just going, how the hell did I ever believe that sort of thing? I mean, I've had so many irrational beliefs in the past that I now look back on and I cringe at myself for thinking and saying anything in accordance with them. So I can imagine that there is part of Emerson that is a bit like, oh, I really don't want to talk about this. And then obviously he went through a number of things and became a charismatic Christian.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really know a lot about charismatic Christianity. I don't really know that much about Christianity in general, apart from some really common claims, and my focus on God has been more on common properties. But Wiki says that charismatic Christianity is a form of Christianity that emphasizes the work of the Holy Spirit, spiritual gifts, and modern-day miracles as an everyday part of believers' lives.
Yeah, so it's a bit different maybe to a lot of the forms of Christianity that we generally interact with on the internet. And it shows that... Sorry.
I was just going to say, I feel like it's very much a play on Christianity is a theology of works, not just of faiths. And sort of the way it talks about spiritual gifts, it's stuff that we're given from heaven, I guess, like life, birth. I'm not really sure, but that's the sort of reading I get from it.
Yeah, it shows that there's quite a lot of different forms of Christianity. And actually, Emerson, because neither of us actually know that much about charismatic Christianity, we'd be really interested in having you on to discuss it in more detail. In fact, your entire journey from being a young Earth creationist to a charismatic Christian, and some more of the common practices between the two, some of the common phrases, and the ways you deconstructed from both of them, and anything in between. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much else that I can really say on it, because it's not a form of Christianity I'm particularly well versed in, and it's not how I was brought up as a Christian myself.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head for why we wanted to bring it up, in that it kind of shows that there isn't really this single monolithic Christianity. There are just, not even just Presbyterian, Catholic, Protestant. There are even deeper levels than that. So, yeah, it's good to remind us atheists that there is no monolithic Christianity.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the number of times I have had a conversation with a fellow atheist who is arguing against biblical literalism, and you're like, you know, that's the smallest percentage of Christians, right? You haven't disproved Christianity by disproving biblical literalism. At best, you've disproved biblical literalism. You know?
Yeah. And a very common response from those atheists is, well, it's not my fault I have to tell you what you believe, or it's not my fault you don't understand what you believe. Well, yes, it is, because that's not what they believe.
Anyway, what's our next video, Dave?
Ooh, that would be Godless Scummer, Jeff.
Hey.
Which is a really interesting one, yeah.
Ahoy!
In response to that question, yes, I have in the past. It's about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I'm guessing. I used to be into Norse paganism and very much believed in the existence of Norse gods. I'd sort of reason. Well, I thought I had good reasons for that at the time. I'm not. Again, I later came to the conclusion that I probably didn't. And sort of went more I'd say about 2017 or so, I went more back towards saying I was an atheist. Introduced to the concepts of gods, probably a young age, I suppose, exposed to, concepts like Christianity, I suppose it would have been. Okay.
And that was Jeff, also known as Godless Scummer, who's just a brilliant guy, and everybody should go and subscribe to him now. He's got a great sense of humor. He's just really nice, and he knows his films, which is always good. And Jeff's answer was a little bit different than most others, one of the reasons that we chose it. And for 2 reasons. Not only does he say he used to be heavily into Norse paganism, but also that he actually believed it, which is very different to what a lot of people say, who say they like the concepts, they like the rituals, they like the ideas, but they understand that they're not real gods. Jeff actually believed in the gods, which is something I've not come across before.
Well, I mean, to throw it back to my own story, when I was becoming a non-theist and I was going in and out of being agnostic and a theist, the Norse gods were one of the ones that I actually felt an affinity to for a while. And I thought maybe they did exist. And then I started having ideas like all the pagan religions were almost different aspects, different ways to explain the same gods and concepts to different people. So I started believing in almost all paganism being the same thing and having, more in tune with the way the world actually was than, modern religions. And one of the things I actually liked about Norse paganism was their creation myth. And it was two opposing planes, the plane of ice and the plane of fire, colliding together and creating all matter that existed. Now, to me, that was like, wow, how could they see something that was so similar to what the science says today, with matter and antimatter having this battle, if you will, and forming all matter that is today? And it really spoke to me that there was this metaphorical take that seemed so accurate to modern scientific understanding. So there was part of me that really bought into it for a while, though I did, as well, obviously, I believe no gods exist. So as you know, I ended up going to it all. But there is definitely some interesting things within Norse paganism.
I don't know enough about it, to be honest. So I've been watching Ocean Keltoy recently, just to try and learn a few things. And he's a really interesting channel if anybody wants to look into this stuff.
Yeah, fair. It's to be honest, it's been years since I've looked in it. It's probably been about 20 years since I've looked into it in any detail, and I've definitely damaged a number of brain cells since then. All I've got is my memories of being quite convinced, and a few of the things I was really convinced by. But as with a number of things, when you put them to the side, you no longer think about them, and the memories sort of ebb away. And I'm sure if someone started speaking about something that I'd read before, I'd go, "Oh yeah, I remember that." But at this moment in time, what I have spoken about, plus runes, is about the only things I can really remember.
Yeah.
So, if you want to quiz me on Norse mythology, I will definitely fail.
If I wanted to go to somebody, I'd go for 3 Vikings, 1 Atheist.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. In fact, I'd love to have both Jeff and 3 Vikings on to have a conversation about that and let people know about the myths. So who's our next Dave? Who's our next Dave?
Nobody. Hopefully. Nobody wants another me in the world.
I meant who's our next video?
Well, our next video is one of our own favorite people. And that's Bearded Heretic. Yeah, that little bastard.
Yeah, don't listen to him. Right wanker him.
Yeah. And we should say we are recording this on his birthday, so happy belated birthday when this finally comes out.
So I actually did believe in a god. I watched back my questions for like asking atheist videos, and there was a discussion where it was like it didn't really apply to me because I've not believed in a god for a very long time. So it's about, I was basically this is the trouble, okay? So I wasn't brought up in like a religious household, and I think this is going to lead into a question later on. But the school I went to was Church of England, which is like the state church, and I think that was, I did start believing in God then. I went to church occasionally. I went to Sunday school and stuff, learned about what God meant. There was like people that would come and talk to us about God, Like, there's this guy called Darius who explained the Trinity to us using a banana by splitting a three and then tying it up and saying, look, it's three parts, but it's also one. Trying to get across that very... Hey, it's not cosmic glue, it's space. I'm in space. Trying to get that... And yes, okay, naturalism works. Good. I'm glad. I've lost my train of thought. It's going to be what the stream is like, isn't it? You know, I tried setting everything up nicely, and now my brain's going. Where was I? Darius. Darius taught us about the Trinity. So yeah, I learned about gods very young, especially the Christian Protestant version of the Christian God. I started kind of not believing in God around the age of 8 or 9. It didn't make much sense to me when I was in school, but I was agnostic for a long time. I wasn't sure if I believed or not, what I believed in. I thought there probably is something there, probably something after death, because it's in the zeitgeist. It's in the very core of our society that, you know, there's life after death. It's everywhere. So I think I had that belief for a long time, and then I dated a Christian girl, daughter of a minister who was very Christian, and she kind of was trying to persuade me to be Christian, which makes sense. And then that fell through. That was like when I was 15, 16. And then went to university, learned about like psychology in more depth and biology and evolution and stuff. And that's kind of when I became an atheist. And I became one of those annoying atheists that I now argue with on Twitter. So yeah, I've been an atheist since I was like, you know, late teens, early 20s. So almost probably about 10 years now. So yeah. So in terms of which religion do I ascribe to? C of E, Christian, Protestant. Yeah. Icarus, was I an agnostic atheist or an agnostic atheist? Well, one, that's not an option because you said agnostic twice, which I think you meant gnostic or gnostic. But two, don't bring that to my stream. You know we don't talk about that stuff here. That's not my bag. I'm better than that. I'm going to go to question 3 now. Thank you for making me laugh, though.
And that was our very own bearded heretic, who joins us regularly on this channel. And he's a great guy, most of the time, except, you know, for his whole pseudoscience thing. But as you can see, he states that he was raised in, like, religion, and he had religion around him, and he was C of E until he was about 10, and then he became agnostic until he got to uni, started studying psychology, started studying beliefs, and that eventually led him into atheism. And if I remember right, it was like a lack of belief type atheism.
So his story is somewhat similar to mine, except the time between, and I think it was around 10 until I hit my tweens, I was exploring different forms of paganism, I guess. Because I still felt that there was something that should be there. And he even said that, you know, it's in the zeitgeist. You're brought up believing these things. You think that there probably is something, even though you're not sure what. And that was what kept me going in and out of being an agnostic and being a theist. And then, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it was the experience with the young Earth creationists that got me interested in the online debating world. And what I didn't mention earlier, it was then I was told that being an atheist in the sense that you believe gods don't exist was wrong. But at that time, I actually bought that because that's what all the other atheists I was interacting with online said to me. And I understand why there is this common belief, at least on the internet, in the debate groups and all of that, that atheism is a lack of belief in gods. And do you know what? That is one of the definitions. It's just not the only definition. And I'd argue it's probably not the best definition, but I wouldn't tell you you couldn't call yourself an atheist just because you lack belief in gods. I don't really care what you call yourself. The important thing is the underlying belief, or lack of, as it were. Your actual position, whatever label you choose for yourself, doesn't really matter. I just prefer clear and concise language.
Their justifications for holding it count somewhat too, as well.
Aye, definitely. But yeah, Luke, thank you for that story. It wasn't the same as what anyone else said, and as I mentioned, there were certain similarities with my own story, so I felt it was worth bringing light to it.
Yeah, and he's just a top guy.
He is.
No bias here or anything.
He wouldn't be on our channel all the time if we didn't love him. So, Dave, who's our next one?
And the next video is another one of my favorite people, and that's Rev N Fidel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this answer as well.
I did.
In fact,
it was very different.
It was very different. And in fact, his entire video is one that you should definitely check out.
He's hilarious.
He is hilarious, and it was quite quick. And he packed a lot of information in there in a really short space of time. And if you then watch it on, at least 1.5 speed, you can get it all done in about 7 minutes.
Yeah. And, his answers do get better as he gets higher and drunker.
I was raised in a Christian Science house, and I did subscribe to that. Now, throw that in your Google machine before you confuse it with Scientology. That's the Tom Cruise one, which was not what I was raised on, because I would have been cool to go to church with Tom Cruise, but not a Scientologist. Christian Science, and I know it's an oxymoron because we weren't either really Christian and certainly weren't scientists, but Mary Baker Eddy, my mom was very devout. My father's religion was, hey, don't piss your mom off.
And that was Rev N Fidel, and thank you for that, Rev. I must admit, as I said earlier, I really enjoyed your entire video. Very amusing, and you amused me constantly on Twitter. Now, your question and the reason, your answer and the reason that we included it was very different from everyone else, and it's because you spoke of Christian Science. Now, Christian Science is a form of Christianity that basically relies on God for faith healing and doesn't see Christ in the way that most Christians do. They don't see him as part of God or godly, but they do see him as divine. Now, that's probably my limit of understanding of Christian Science and the differences between. Again, like we mentioned with Emerson, there is a plethora of different takes on Christianity. There's also the point in there where Christ isn't necessarily the moral marker. So there is the acknowledgement that not everything Christ did was necessarily moral, which I think is a good point, because it's one of the common things that we atheists will say is the fact that, well, look at this and look at this and look at this. These clearly aren't moral behaviors from Christ. So how can you say that, this godly person is doing immoral things? So it's got an answer for that. However, there's definitely a lot of issues with faith healing and the fact that it just doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I know we probably do have Christian Scientists in the UK. Like, I have no doubts that it's something that bleeds over here, but it's not really something we hear about. Yet, when it comes to hearing in America, we hear all the time about children dying because they've not been given treatment and their parents have relied on faith healing. So it's just such an alien one to me, is Christian Science.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, it's like the YEC thing, though. I've only ever met one in the UK, yet you come online and you've got a ton from the southern states of America who are all YECs. And I don't know if this is a fair statement, but it's almost like religion has taken on a different or maybe even younger form over there. Like, we've had a lot of our religion happen over here, and over time we've become pretty whereas as America's more of a newer country, a younger country, it takes on religion are younger as well. And I don't mean that in a condescending or patronizing way, though I know it does sound that, but I can't think of the words to say it in any other way. So, I mean, perhaps that is part of it. They haven't had the same sort of stuff where we've gone to a lot of the ideas.
Yeah. Well, they've never really had a church in control as such. Church has power there, don't get me wrong.
And probably has more control than it does over here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely. But they've never had this kind of split from the church like we've had. It was already split, it was just intertwined, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And don't forget all the propaganda. We're not like those godless commie countries. There's a lot of that built into it as well, I think.
Yeah, you're probably right there. So, Rev, I'd love to hear more about Christian Science and your experience growing up. So, if you do have time, I'd love to know a bit more about it. I'd love to have you on with us. So, this is the invite now. Remind me, because I'll have probably forgotten by tomorrow.
By the end of recording this video.
It'll probably be tomorrow by the time we finish recording. So
yeah,
true. But yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for that. Again, it's nice to have different answers, even though it was similar in the fact that there was the Christian perspective. It was a different Christian perspective. So cheers, Rev. Dave, who have we got next?
Okay, the next one comes from Mathpig's Melee stream, where he just had a bunch of people on. And this is a woman called Phoebe. And she gives a lot of different takes in her response.
Awesome.
Okay, before he starts, I have a problem with this question, and also you stopped it at a very inconvenient point because it's now just a blur on the screen. So could you roll
back it
forward,
up 5
please?
seconds? Yeah.
Oh no!
Oh, there's a very serious face
and then
from
it's
Joe.
Because I have a problem here with his whole premise here, because the final part of the question assumes that you have been introduced to the concept of gods. I know of an atheist who has never been introduced to that concept in the way that this question is designed. Because what this question is designed to say is, well, gods are around, you must have been introduced to them, so therefore you must have explored them. Whereas somebody could have come at this
but
from
I think
completely...
I think the situation is like, you know, we're at the bottom of a coal mine and they're discussing coal. You know, we are in a rabbit hole of atheism. It's expected. So it's like, you know, if you go to the bottom of a coal mine and you start talking about farming bunny rabbits, probably nobody's going to listen to you because they're not there. I think this is aimed at the audience, you know?
But the thing is, though, this is for atheists and non-theists. But it is assuming that all atheists have a concept of gods and non-theists have a concept of gods. Because you could be a religious person who does not ascribe to a religion with gods.
Is what you're describing applicable to you right now?
To me right now, of course I've been introduced to gods.
Right, so answer the bloody question! Answer the bloody question!
No, because I'm trying to get to the root cause of what he's getting at here. And whilst it may affect me...
Yeah, he just said it. He just said it. If you're responding to a video on an atheist channel, we can infer you've heard about gods. So, moving on, Phoebe, since you were dying to talk, answer the question.
Of course, well, for anyone who knows me, I have ascribed to 2 religions in my past. Both Abrahamic religions. One was Anglicanism and one was Judaism. Judaism is more to me than just a religion, though. It is a cultural identity because it is part of my ethnicity. So that is a bit more complicated for me.
So that was Phoebe from the Mathpig stream. You might remember her from the last video we did as well. So there were some comments there at the beginning, which I feel was an uncharitable reading of the question, because I think pretty much anyone can infer that an atheist channel and anyone watching the atheist channel will have heard that about gods, you know? Perhaps in the off chance that there is someone out there in the world with an internet connection that doesn't have gods, hasn't heard of gods, randomly got linked towards us because of one of my mixes and was listening to it, and then a different video popped up at the end of it that was discussing gods, and they were like, whoa, I've never heard of this God concept, man. I mean, there's the tiniest possibility that that would happen. But realistically speaking, if you have an internet connection, I am fairly certain you will have heard of the God concept. And especially if you are on an atheist channel, watching a stream which is 10 questions for atheists and non-theists, to know what an atheist or non-theist is, you should at least know what a theist is, and to know what a theist is to know what someone that believes that at least one God exists, and therefore you will have heard of the God concept. That said, though, apart from the uncharitable reading of the question, I feel the rest of the answer was actually quite interesting.
It was good, yeah.
And the most interesting part about it was, obviously, she said she'd been a theist of two religions, Christianity and Judaism, but spoke more of the traditional side of Judaism. And this has been a big thing in cultures for a while now, the cultural Jew. The Jews that do not necessarily believe in God or any of the mythical stuff, but really enjoy the culture and the practices. And you see more and more of that sort of thing. And what I've noticed in the last 5 years or so, and it may have been longer, but it's when I have noticed it, is in the last 5 years or so, there are cultural Christians or traditional Christians. And they have been the ones that like all the Christian rituals. In fact, even one of the people who was regularly on our Fresh Air podcast, Andy, loves a lot of the Christian traditions, getting christened and married in a church and all of those sorts of services. He really enjoys them, mainly because it's something that brings family together and, you know, even community together. And I think that somewhat speaks volumes to the fact that there is something that simply being an atheist or non-theist is lacking. We do lack a proper community. Yes, there is the online atheist community. Yes, there might be a local atheist community or secular community or humanist community, but we don't really have the same impact as a religious community. We don't have the same traditions. We don't have the same reasons to bring everyone together. And I think that's why you get traditional Christians and cultural Jews and so on and so forth, because they still enjoy that aspect. And whilst they, whether it's in silence or not, may believe gods don't exist, they still have that attachment to their community, their families, their friends, and so on and so forth.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And in the UK, there is a lot of that. It's just a part of our culture to go to church on Sunday. Maybe not so much now, but, you know, back in the 80s, I guess, it kind of was. And you get people who definitely didn't believe but went with the family because it was a chance to go out in your best suit and meet people and talk to people. And say, maybe share weekly events like bingo for the older generation at the church. There was a definite sense of community centered around it, where they weren't checking your papers to make sure you were Christian. It was just, come and join us.
Yeah.
And there's a song I'm trying to remember that does it really well. I think the song's called Made in England, but I can't remember. But there's a line in it that says, I'm English, I may not believe in God, but I still go to church on a Sunday. You know, that kind of thing. And it kind of hits the nail on the head for the cultural Christian in British society.
And I'm sure there are actually a number of people around the world who are somewhat cultural in their faith. And whether that's because they're afraid of coming out as atheists, because it could be dangerous in the, in the UK, it's not in any way, shape or form. But I'm sure that certain places around the world, it is dangerous to be an atheist.
Yeah.
But there are also those that find comfort in the traditions and communities and things like that. So I think there is something there that we atheists should take away and really consider, and not put it off of it's someone else's problem, it's something someone else should deal with. Actually consider, perhaps we do need some more formalized atheist or secular community, and one that is local, not just dealing with things around the world where there's these tragedies happening, something that deals with local events and local meetups and, playing a game of table tennis together or something like that. But just getting people together and giving them that sort of community outreach vibe, but without the theism involved. And that's not to say that it's to exclude theists either. I don't think that there should be any exclusionary measures. Other than, let's just not discuss the whole God thing. Let's just be together as people.
Yeah, no proselytization.
Yes, most definitely. So who's our next one, Dave?
The next one we decided to go for from Mathpig stream was Mr. Wylis.
Yes, Mr. Wylis, the Gnostic atheist.
Yeah.
So I think I had times when I was a child when I wanted to believe in a God, specifically an Abrahamic God, because like everyone else, I had the free choice of choose the only one you've ever been introduced to, or choose not to believe in a God. Mm-hmm. My parents were really keen for me not to be indoctrinated. So I think if you'd asked them when I was little, they would have probably have said that they were Christians. They would both definitely describe themselves as atheists now. And I wasn't christened, which caused a little bit of strife with my grandparents on my paternal side. And they really weren't religious either. And my grandma was quite spiritual in her later years, love and light and all that sort of stuff. But it just shows you that the power of the hold that religion has over culture. It was an expectation that, of course, I would be christened. You don't even really have to believe, but you've got to be christened. And so I'm not, and neither of my brothers are. I was certainly introduced to the concept of God very early in infant school, if not before. I mean, some of my earliest memories revolve around being read your classic Noah's Ark, for example, that loving tale of where God realized he'd fucked up, and in spite of having all the power that could conceivably exist and knowing everything, he somehow didn't realize that it was going to go wrong, and his only method of correction was to kill absolutely everything apart from what was on the boat.
Loving story.
It's such a beautiful story to tell little children with these smiling, docile animals walking onto this farcically small floating vessel. But so definitely introduced early on. It just never made any sense to me. I've always wanted to understand how things worked, and for me that just doesn't fit into a framework, a model of how the world can work. So gold star atheist for me, please.
Okay, and that was another one from Mathpig stream. Mr. Wylis, I've never come across him before in my travels in the atheist kind of circles. but his story is kind of similar to mine. He was brought up non-religious, and when he was first introduced to it when he was younger, it never actually made any sense to him. And that's something I can kind of get on board with, because that's basically the way it was for me. My parents weren't religious. I wasn't brought up religious. I was introduced to the idea of the Greek gods at a young age, long before I was introduced to the concept of the God of Abraham. So, of course, the link for me is that these gods I was taught about in the past are said to be made up. So this God must be similar. I didn't quite realize that so many people actually held it true. But I was young, you know. I would probably have a different opinion if it had happened when I was a teenager. But the God would have made even less sense to me at the same time if I was older and I was introduced to it.
Yeah, that's fair. And so I find this equally interesting, and it's not something you tend to find in American families, but it's still equally not that common with like my generation or even your generation. To have completely atheist families. There's a lot of wishy-washy theism, and what I mean by that is basically Church of England.
Well, that's what my grandparents were. They were C of E Christians, as were like my grandparents' siblings and everybody above, and even the people, even my mum's sister and brother, they were kind of atheist. But above that, anyone above that was religious. Yeah. And like my cousin, David, who still lives in Canada, he wasn't really brought up religious, even though my aunt and uncle were religious on that side. It's kind of a complicated one, but his parents were religious and he was raised atheist, so to speak. But he's now Christian.
Oh, wow.
And quite devout. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how it can go. I mean, there's so many things that can influence a religious belief. Maybe that's one for another time. I'd like to be informed as to what inspired such devoutness. But yeah, so it's, in some respects, even though it's different generations, I think your and my family were somewhat similar, except mine was an additional generation down. But yeah, sorry.
Well, if you go through my family history, you'll see a lot of my kind of ancestors had a lot to do with the church, going right back to the 1700s. There's a church in Cornwall that has our names associated with it, and it's kind of weird how that, when we got to my generation and my parents' generation of our family, it just suddenly stopped.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, I can see that with mine though. Like my nana was Catholic. My aunt is Christian. I don't know what form of Christian. I didn't even know growing up that she was as religious as she was. And my mum used to use the biblical stories along with things like Aesop's fables as moral lessons. And obviously I went to Christian schools because they were the best schools around, and my parents wanted me to have the best education. So they never really contested the religion thing. And do you know what? Even to this day, I've never had that conversation with my mum about religion and if she actually believes a God exists or not. It's never been important enough to have that conversation. I know she got us christened, but again, I don't know if that's for the traditional reasons or because she actually believed. I know that when she married my stepdad, that my brothers that she had with him were christened in a Catholic christening ceremony rather than a Protestant one. or Church of England one, should I say. Because his family were quite Catholic, but you talk to my brothers and my sister, and like there is no God belief there whatsoever, and with at least two of them, there's an active disbelief. So it is almost, again, like there's this line in the sand, and there's a wiggly line above us that's sort of like, oh, it's going on there. And then there's this nope.
Yeah.
I suppose it's weird how it happens. Obviously, I'm not raising my kids with a particular God belief, but I'm going to do my best to raise them with critical thinking skills. I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to say I'm going to succeed. I'm going to do my best to raise them with critical thinking skills. And if they end up believing in a God because they've applied those skills well, then wicked. But I do remember sometimes my son would say to me that, I mean, he doesn't believe anymore, but he would come at me with what was essentially the meme version of Christianity. And I would get very frustrated. And at that point in time, I don't feel I necessarily dealt with his statements well, because they were just the ones that I dealt with online so often. And it was just like, oh my God, what the fuck are you going on?
It's followed me home.
Yeah. And I hope if these sorts of things came up again in the future, I deal with them better. But, you know, I even said to him a few years ago, I don't care if you believe a God exists or doesn't exist. I just want you to have a good reason to believe that God exists, rather than just tell me, well, there's stuff we don't know, therefore God. Because that is generally what you're telling me. And he's like, well, I don't believe anymore, and so it doesn't matter. I was like, okay, that's fine. But if you ever do believe in a God, I don't mind if you do. I just want you to have a good reason to believe in a God, rather than giving me these really bad arguments.
I mean, I don't have kids, but I would be more disappointed if I had them. I would be more disappointed if one of them came back as a meme type atheist than a meme type theist.
Yeah, that's fair. So, who have we got next?
The next one is the final person from the Mathpig stream that we'll be covering, at least for this, this answer. And it's Savage Minow.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
I was raised Presbyterian. My dad's Presbyterian. My mom's not. So I think that kind of like left the door open for me to kind of explore, I guess, a little bit religiously as a kid. And I had, I've talked about it a little bit on my channel as well as this channel, I think, that I had like kind of a religious experience, if you will, and became a youth pastor at that point in my life. And later on, after I moved away for school, I actually ended up getting my ministerial license and had kind of a small congregation that all just met in my house. And I got to a point where I tried to, with my congregation, to like preach what I felt like were universal truths. And I felt like I got to a point where it was like, I don't necessarily know that I believe that any of this means anything, though, and it was like, I can tie this together to this, to this, to this, but like, what is it? It doesn't. And I felt like I was lying. And I happened to move kind of around that same time, and I just kind of like stopped kind of basically cut off contact with my congregation, and besides just a few members, and went to go work at UPS, and had kind of like an opposite of religious experience, if you will, kind of it's very much how people describe like having a religious experience when they like go off to work camp or whatever. But it was the opposite of that, where I just realized that like it's okay that it doesn't mean anything, I guess.
You looked down and saw one set of footprints and you realized, they were your own.
And it's okay. It's okay. Like, I got this, you know? And that was, yeah, but you're very much right, Mr. Wylis. Yeah.
And that was Savage Minow. Again, like I said earlier, from the Mathpig stream. Her answer is very different to all the others. You know, like one of the reasons that we've highlighted it is just because of how unique it is. We haven't had a lot of people say that they became a youth minister and, you know, got their ministerial license. So she did all that. And then eventually, because she actually was concerned with the truth of it all, she started realizing that it wasn't true. And that led her away from the path she was on.
Yeah, which is really, really, really interesting to get sort of that far down the line, if you will. Like, it's not just, oh yeah, I really, 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 really believe, oh, hang on, I've got questions. It's, I'm telling other people what to believe. And oh shit, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. And which shows a level of integrity, because this has a sense of epistemic responsibility about it, where you know you're influencing other people's thoughts. So perhaps you should take a step back and be responsible about the information that you're passing on, or you bear some responsibility for what happens to that person based on the information you pass along, which is a really good thing.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Dave, actually, I know we've done entire streams on it, but could you sum up epistemic responsibility in an almost tweet form, just for anyone who might be interested in what you meant there?
Okay, epistemic responsibility is the idea that we bear some responsibility for the falsehoods and the truths that we have in our own, but also that we pass on. So if we pass on bad information and those people go away and pass on further bad information and bad things happen because of that information, we have what could be considered a moral responsibility, but it's an epistemic responsibility, and also that our own internal beliefs, we are responsible for making sure that they're as good as possible and as justified as possible, which helps with the external epistemic responsibility.
Which in turn can be translated into epistemic justification, which is sometimes called the burden of proof on the internet, or burden of justification. We can go into a whole conversation about that. But the short of it is, whatever position you hold, even if it's just a lack of belief position, you should be able to justify why you hold that particular position and not another one. So you should have counters for arguments for holding X and Y positions, and think that your position is the better one to hold. So yeah, as you said, it does show some form of integrity there, and I mean, well done. Genuinely well done for looking into things more and going, oh, bugger. And I'm sure that wasn't the exact words that went through your head. I'm sure you just didn't suddenly go, oh, bugger.
Well, she's American, so she wouldn't.
You know, exactly. But unless your internal monologue is actually British.
I mean, a lot of them do watch Coronation Street, so...
Yes, it could be. But yes, thank you, Savage Minow, for that one. I can't imagine what it was like going that far down the path, you know, and then suddenly going, oh my God. oh, my non-God, as it might be.
Yeah. I mean, experiences like this fascinate me because they're so far removed from my own that I can't really even imagine what it's like.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want to give us a bit more detail on that, we'd both be very interested in hearing more about it in the future. So, Dave, is there anyone else that we had for tonight? I think we had
There's
more.
Two more.
Yeah.
Two more. I'm going to kind of swap the order around a little because we've been going by how they are in the save playlist that they've got. So if people enjoy one of the answers, they can then know which in the playlist is the one that they're going to want to go for or whereabouts in it is. So in the playlist next would normally be Brina, who we've had on our channel many times and is brilliant.
Absolutely.
So instead, we're going to go with somebody who's not really dialogued with our channel before or interacted with us. And he's a fellow called Ozien. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And he reminds me a lot of your fashion style. You know?
I must say, I do remember liking his goggles.
Yeah. So it's him next, and then we'll come to Brina after that. And there's reasons for that, which we'll expand upon when we get to Brina.
Awesome. All right.
Okay, so have you ever believed in a God? I personally have never believed in a God. I did in kindergarten go to Catholic school, and that's when I was first exposed to the God belief and the idea of God. And I did test the theory by praying that my parents would stop fighting and would stop throwing stuff and stop being violent. They were never violent physically to me, but other stuff went on. Anyways, so, and nothing happened. So my prayers weren't answered. And I could read at 5 years old pretty well. I mean, now I can read really well. But anyways, so that was my first exposure. I never believed in a God. I've tried. I've experienced a faith belief or feeling like I call it an epiphany. I have forced myself to believe in a God for momentary periods of time, but it's fleeting, just to see if I could experience it. And I have, but I discount it as a normal emotional response.
That was Ozien. I just wanted to raise the props for the goggles. They're bloody magical. I absolutely love them. And noticed he happened to like the steampunk stuff. I must admit, I haven't dressed that way for a while. The last time I got the goggles out was actually my wedding.
I was just going to say that.
But yeah, that aside, yeah, he had an interesting take. He said he never believed, but at about 5, I think it was, that he said that he started praying and never got anything back. Now, there's a couple of different things that we can talk about here. And one of them is, one of the common takes about prayer is that it shouldn't be about asking for things from God. It should be more of a reflective and meditative state. There are many theists that will say asking God for things, that does not work. You know, it is about giving thanks, showing gratitude, being grateful, and reflecting on yourself and your actions and what you can do to be better. And I like that take on prayer because there's been studies that have shown the other kind doesn't work. However,
yeah. There's also a sense of divine hiddenness with this. He's probably a bit young to understand the concept at that time. He probably understands it now. But the idea is that the Christian God is such a God that it wants to have a relationship with anybody that's open to it. So if, as a 5-year-old, he's praying to God, you would imagine that he's being earnest with it. He's being honest with it. And so if a God is seeking out a relationship and he wants to kind of get away from the sinful nature of humans, or get humans away from their sinful nature, you would think he would want to have a relationship with that child and possibly guide it in some way. But Ozien says nothing ever really changed and he never felt any different. So,
yeah. And I mean, the thing he was talking about was obviously problems at home, which can have a big impact on one's life, obviously.
Good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how many people actually suffer with these big problems at home, isn't it?
Yeah.
You think there'd be more information about that out there on the web too? And I know it's becoming more realized, but still quite in the anyway. That's not what the stream is about. Maybe that's one for the future as well.
Another one,
yeah. We got a new stream topic, but yeah. So I sort of get where he's coming from. Obviously, you have more in line with him because you never believed, whereas I mean, I grew up with beliefs myself. Yeah, I don't know where we go with the thought of prayer and it not working, because okay, yeah, there are some Christians that do justify that that's not what prayer is supposed to be for, but then there are other takes around, well, God will answer your prayers.
Yeah.
So will he answer your prayers or won't he? He will if it's what he was going to do anyway.
Yeah, that's it. It's all kind of complicated, and there's so many different ideas about prayers that, well, he could say that, he's kind of falsified one type of idea. There's others, like you say, who will jump in and say, well, that's not really prayer anyway.
Yeah.
But then you get all the Christian parents who put their kids to bed and say, don't forget to say your prayers to bed. So obviously there is some link to a child being able to understand what they're doing.
Yeah. I don't think there has ever been a consistent view, at least in my lifetime anyway, of what prayer is supposed to be and what prayer is supposed to do, even within particular religion. There might be within a particular denomination of a religion or a particular church within a particular denomination, but not within a particular religion. Yeah.
I think Muslims might fit that bill.
Yeah?
Because they all kind of have this idea that prayer is about the praising of God. It's not about asking for questions. Or you can perform dua, I think it is, where you pray for somebody else and pray for them to get help and things like that. But I'm not sure about it being personal.
Right, yeah.
I might be wrong, but yeah, this is just kind of what I picked up.
Yeah, that's fair. I suppose there's still that asking for things, but it's because it's not a selfish ask.
Yeah.
Sort of makes it that little bit different. You could even say that though from Ozien, he was asking for his parents not to fight anymore.
Yeah.
You could equally argue there was a selfish element to that, but I mean, we're really splitting hairs there.
Yeah, that's it.
But I mean, again, I do wish we had more Muslims or ex-Muslims answer our streams on this.
I do, yeah.
And hopefully, before we record all of the videos and we start releasing these, we will get some responses from Muslims and ex-Muslims and other faiths as well. Hindus and ex-Hindus and other sorts of pagans. And, even though up until now we haven't included your answers, there's still the chance to be included. So hopefully we do have some very different answers. And if we need to go back to, say, this question and go, okay, we've had like 6 or 7 new answers that are completely different to this, we'll do a question 2B,
follow up.
Yeah. So we're not adverse to doing that. So don't think that just because we're releasing these videos that you're not going to respond because, they're already responding. It's a shame. No. Still do your response video. And if we get enough in, we'll do a follow-up to the questions we've already answered. And there's still a chance that you'll be included in anything that we do in the future. I mean, these aren't scripted, so there's plenty of room for you to be included. Just make sure you let us know. and leave a comment in under any of the videos to say, "Oh, I've responded to your video," because otherwise we won't know. From time to time, one pops up in our feed, and we go, "Oh, someone's actually done a response to this, but they haven't told us about it." Okay, we'll add them to the playlist. But yeah, if you don't tell us, we're not actually going to know. Oh, do you?
Yeah, every few days to about a week, I do a search. But unless you actually catch my search terms, I'm not going to pick up your video.
Yeah, that's fair as well. And people do title the video differently. So again, as you said, your search terms may not be picked up. So Dave, the last one you mentioned was Brina.
Yeah, Brina Ryce. And she runs a great YouTube channel that covers loads of different ideas and topics, from discussion about what's happening in YouTube atheism to power to readings of manga. And she has some really interesting ideas, and everybody go subscribe to her channel, because I think you'll find something that you'll find interesting in there too.
She'll definitely end up being one of your favorite internet weirdos. And I mean that in a completely positive way. Because I love internet weirdos.
We're the best.
Yeah. I mean, that's because we're biased, but yeah.
Me, biased? I do philosophy. I'm never biased.
Anyway, we saved Brina's video for last because it's that little bit longer than the other responses we've had so far. And we felt that maybe if you've got this far, you might be interested into a really detailed and personal response to this question. And you're not just skipping through for the quick answers. Though we understand that, a lengthy answer isn't for everyone. And so therefore we've ordered it in such a way that you wouldn't have to necessarily go through that.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever believed in a God? Yes. I was a Christian. I don't remember ever having like a specific sect like of Christianity in the way that I was raised. I know we went to a Protestant church, so I guess I would say Protestant, but because I was raised in like a variety of different environments, I was exposed to like different sects of Christianity. So that's why I think I never like fully identified with one specifically. And I would have been introduced to the concept of God before I could even like remember being introduced to him. That was just kind of a normalcy for where I grew up and where I lived. It was abnormal to not believe in a God. Like it was just never even considered. I do remember at a very young age starting to ask questions. Like I specifically remember sitting in a car with one of my family members and just asking, and I was pretty young. I would have been in like maybe early middle school, like 6th grade, and just asking, how do we know that our God exists when people believe in different gods? So I started questioning at that young age, how are we supposed to know this? And of course, it got reaffirmed by, more biblical talk and saying, well, you just know because and, I bought into all of that. And I think about later middle school, 8th grade, and then throughout my high school years, for about 3 years, I dived into, I don't think I realized it at the time, but I dived into evangelicalism. And the reason of that was because I got wrapped into a group called Teens for Christ, which they didn't meet up at our school, but there was flyers for it. A lot of their kids went. They went to, it was held at another student's house with adults that, were employed at this place called Teens for Christ. And it's it's basically kind of like a Bible study, but it also I would say it was also to convert people, because that's kind of it's what happened to me, and it's what happened to a lot of people. I believed at the time that was when I was first saved, was going through one of these meetings. So that's why I got really into the religion at that point. Because even though I always thought I believed before, it was kind of one of those things like where you hear Christians like talk about how they almost relate like before they were saved to being an atheist, which, you know, is just not true. But it was like, oh, I didn't really believe until this point, you know, and it was a very moving experience. We were, of course, there was this music going on and we were all praying, and I had a very emotional moment because I was praying about a lot of really hard stuff that I was going through at that time and went through in the past. And I was, you know, bawling my eyes out, listening to this music and asking to be saved and asking for, you know, God to come into my heart. And it was very meaningful for me. And because of those emotions were so strong, obviously that's a part of what kind of took hold of my beliefs and other, you know, supernatural experiences, because my emotions were tied so close to that moment that I couldn't really separate it, you know, in my mind. And that was kind of my step into evangelicalism, you know, and believing young earth, being a young earth creationist and all of that. Luckily, it didn't last very long. And the reason being is actually because even though I dived, it was really weird because I already had these conflicting beliefs before that. And sorry, I know I'm kind of going off from what the question is, but I do want to talk about this a little bit, because I never really talked about it before. Even though I you know, believe that I dived into that part of evangelicalism, I already had some controversial beliefs before that didn't really get swayed from the teachings that I was being taught. You know, I had already started to feel like the way that gay people were treated was wrong. You know, I had some internalized prejudice, but I was already starting to work through that. And I think even going into this group, Teens for Christ, it almost pushed me further away. Like it reaffirmed over time my stance, even as I was struggling with my own sexuality, which I'm sure was a part of it. You know, I was already being exposed to media that was diverse and queer people. And I think really helped me come to terms with the fact that, you know, they're just people and that they deserve to be treated as any other person. I just didn't really buy into what they were selling at that point. And I was also, at a very young age, I became pro-choice, and that was a really passionate topic for me because also, strangely enough, in 8th grade, we had to do a project that was picking a controversial topic, and then we had to argue the opposite side of it. So I picked abortion, and I was coming at it from a pro-life stance. But as a 14-year-old, when I did the research, and this would have been before I got caught up, I think, in Teens for Christ, I came to the conclusion that I was pro-choice, that I felt like people deserve to have equal access to abortion. So that also kind of conflicted with this evangelicalism. So I think I was already, it was weird because I was like split in so many different ways. Like I wasn't this typical, like, just you just buy into everything that they're selling. So because those beliefs conflicted so much, and I think particularly my beliefs on abortion, also my beliefs on, you know, LGBTQ rights, I eventually was driven further away. You know, I dived into it really strongly at first because my emotional ties to God, to what I believed to be God at that time, were so strong. And I was in it for about 3 years. I even became, you know, a leader. I became part of their ministry. I helped bring more people. I even brought one of my close friends into that group, and they actually ended up working for them now. So as an adult, they're still working over at Teens for Christ. So I did a lot of stuff for them, but eventually I pulled away because there was too many conflicts, and that was kind of the start of me, I guess, deconstructing Christianity. And it took many years from there to where I actually got to being an atheist, but it kind of started with deconstructing Christianity and then realizing no longer identifying a Christian and just identifying as a theist. I dabbled in Judaism for a little bit. I dabbled in Buddhism for probably longer than that. And then I would just kind of consider myself spiritual. And then now I'm here, a skeptic atheist. So that was a quick summary of like a 10-year long journey. And yeah, I guess that's my answer to that question. Probably way more information than anyone needed, but that's where I'm at. So
that was Brina's response. And as you can see, she went through many different forms of Christianity. battled with questions around sexuality, became an evangelical Christian, and then when writing a paper from a pro-life perspective about abortion, obviously, she was more convinced by the other arguments and became pro-choice.
Which is pretty impressive, because we all know how strongly held these kind of beliefs are, the pro-life and pro-choice positions. They're quite personal positions, and they're quite passionate positions. So for her to go in and read those arguments and be convinced by them while trying to oppose them shows quite a high level of intellectual integrity and intellectual humility.
Most definitely. And I think that's the key point I think I want people to take away from this. You know, you can have a really firm belief but still be open to new information. And you can be absolutely certain of something but still be open to new information. And I think that's the way we should be. Even if you have, you could say, I'm 100% certain about this belief, but still be open to new information being presented to you. And I think that shows good skepticism. It's not doubting everything. It's even in your firmest beliefs being willing to reconsider them, take on board the other side, and actually go, oh, should I be as firm in my belief?
Yeah. And one thing I'll say about Brina is that, well, she might not have called herself a skeptic at that time. She shows a higher level of skepticism and practice of skepticism at that time than many that I see labeling themselves a skeptic today.
I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah. That is what skepticism is supposed to look like.
Yeah, most definitely. And we often see a lot of our fellow atheists say that skepticism is what led me to atheism. And, you know, you can't be a skeptic and be a theist. But as you say there, Dave, I mean, that's an example of a theist who was also a good skeptic. You know, and yes, okay, it led them to atheism, but it might not always lead them to atheism. I genuinely believe there's plenty of skeptical theists. They may not be particularly skeptical about their religion. They may be skeptical about it too, but they can be skeptics in a lot of ways. And what we see online are a lot of atheists who unfortunately aren't particularly good skeptics. It seems like all of their learnings come from memes that they see on the internet, and it's incredibly embarrassing to be associated with them.
Well, for a lot of them, I feel like the skepticism is kind of performative, and they hold beliefs that are just as dogmatic as those people that they're arguing against. Now, what we saw with Brina was what could be considered a dogmatic belief that was changed, because even though Brina might not have realized it, it was skepticism.
Yeah. And I mean, I applaud you for that, Brina. And also thank you for the story. I mean, I love the fact that you added so much personal stuff in there. It's the stuff I like hearing and learning about. You know, as I mentioned, we left it to the end because I know that's not necessarily what everybody's here for. Some people want those quick and snappy answers, which is why they prefer maths to, say, philosophy. But that sort of thing is what actually interests me and holds me to this sort of conversation. So thank you very much for the very detailed response. And again, I would advise anybody check out Brina's stream on her 10 questions responses.
There's a lot of brilliant answers in there, and a lot of very open and honest answers that and like genuine answers, and you don't generally get that on YouTube. Everybody's performing for the camera, everybody's performing for their audience, they're performing for their Patreons. But Brina's answers are very genuine, very personal, very open, and the world needs more of that.
Most definitely. 100% agree. And that was our last video for the night, wasn't it, Dave?
It was. Kind of gutting, because it's been very enjoyable and very interesting.
Yeah, most definitely. There's been a lot of different takes, although there has been, even though it's been different forms of Christianity, there's been a very consistent Christian background within most of our responses. And again, it's what we've said. We wish we had more responses in both of our sets of questions from Hindus and ex-Hindus and Muslims and ex-Muslims, all of that sort of thing. And, you know, essentially what we've done with our 10 questions is we've got a lot of the Christian and ex-Christian impact. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm appreciative and of all the responses, and I've really enjoyed all of them. I genuinely have. It's just I'd hoped that they would be a little bit more diverse as well. I mean, we're on the internet. Pretty much anyone could have responded in the entire world, yet most of it came from Christians and ex-Christians.
I will say I can sort of understand the trepidation, because a lot of atheists ask these questions in the same way that a lot of Christians and Muslims ask these questions, where it's supposed to be gotcha answers, and they're not really looking for genuine answers. They're looking to say, I got you. So there's probably some trepidation for people who don't know us and haven't come across us before, but have come across other questions. So I can see why some might not want to respond.
Yeah, and equally, I mean, as an ex-Muslim atheist, you might have had the opinion that actually we were secretly theists ourselves looking for gotchas as well. We do get that a lot. I mean, even from the Mathpig stream, there are a couple of people on there that were saying these questions sound like they've been written by a theist. Well, they were written by me. If I'm a theist, then okay.
You learned something new about yourself today. Well, it gets so bad, I've now got my banner with the spaceman meme. I mean, Dave's an atheist?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we do get it a lot. I mean, we're a little bit outside the norm, I guess, for the online atheist type. So I can understand, with the way human psychology and tribalism works, why we seem like we're not atheists, but the pair of us believe gods don't exist, and we're willing to justify why we believe gods don't exist. You know, again, I mean, that's outside the norm. The average internet atheist goes, I don't have to justify my position at all. I only lack belief. So we actually hold a stronger position than the average internet atheist, but we are the ones that get called theist.
Or anti-theist.
Oh, no, don't go down that route. Honestly, ridiculous. But, I mean, those are one of those things that happens. And at the end of the day, we've said a number of times, you know, atheism is polysemous. The important thing is the underlying content of your position. And, you know, I'd rather have a conversation with you about that than split hairs over a definition. The time that we get annoyed with the whole definition conversation is when someone says it's only this. You know, when someone says it's only a lack of belief, that's the only position it is. Then we go, well, no, because there's all these other definitions, and this is why we prefer this particular one. And I'm happy to justify why I prefer the proposition God does not exist, with the atheist me accepting that proposition as true. You know, and I think that's the better way to define atheism. But I'm not saying you have to define atheism or atheist in that way either. And
just for a bit of balance, we also hate when those who adopt a philosophical position also say, well, no, that's not atheism. It is only, it's not just one side or the other. We don't like any side doing it.
Yeah. We have a preference, right? We do have a preference for the more commonly used definitions within philosophy of religion. But equally, we do, as Dave just said, dislike it when someone who is from that park says, no, it is only the proposition or belief gods do not exist. That's the only way atheism can be defined. No, that's equally erroneous. It's not the only way. It may be the better way. We'd agree with you that it was the better way. But do you know what? If someone wants to be an atheist and they only lack belief, let them. They might have a little bit to learn about the history of atheism, and they might have a bit to learn about epistemic justification and, you know, their misconceptions of things like the burden of proof and their meme education. But even still, it was like when Godless Granny was on the last question, and she was like, well, I use the term atheist, but agnostic would probably be a better label. And she gave a full-on justification for why she uses atheist over agnostic, even though she understands agnostic is a better term for her. And I've had conversations with people on Twitter who go, yeah, do you know what? I just use atheist because generally on the internet, people understand non-theist to be atheist. But I know if I was having a more philosophical conversation, my position is actually an agnostic. And it's like, great, that's a full-on justification why you're using a different label to how it would be used outside of the norm within philosophy. And there are plenty of good justifications for using different labels. But under no circumstances are rocks atheist. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed tonight, and thank you, Dave, for coming on and reviewing these videos with me. And obviously, thank you to everybody out there who has sent in a video. I know some of them didn't get included, and to everybody who wrote a text response as well. I mean, we do take them into account when we're doing these videos, but they're much harder to include. So if you do want more of your answers included in these videos, please just record a video. Even if you do it in the same way like TMM did, where it was just voice and text. You don't need your face on there. You can still have your anonymity. You know, just put it on there, and then we can actually display it on screen and have a discussion about it. And I positively encourage you to do so. And hopefully it will make you think a little bit more about your position as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say sorry to anybody who left, you know, a video response and didn't get included in this time round. It's just, as you can probably see from the runtime of this video, it's already quite long, and we're trying to pick out the most unique answers to cover, because they make for the most interesting content.
And most definitely. And everybody who has responded to us will get at least one spot in our videos. And
oh yeah,
I will say, by the time it comes to things like the morality question, I think I'm probably going to end up playing everybody's video, unless we suddenly get another 100 videos come in between now and then.
Yeah,
but I think that there is so much to unpack and discuss with the morality videos that it's definitely one of those questions where it deserves a lot of exploration and a lot of airtime.
Yeah, it'll be a part A, part B, part C, part D, part
yeah. We probably will have to end up doing that, won't we? Yeah. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. This has been the responses to the questions for atheists, and this has been question 2. I am Joe.
And I am Dave.
Have yourself a good night.
Good night, all. Thanks for watching.
Cheers.
Okay, so that was Ben, of course. Everybody, Ben, what am I saying? It's been a long weekend.